Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Play, Pause, Rewind. It is our 102nd episode, second episode of the year 2025, and there's a lot to talk about in 2025 so far. But Niles, how have you been since our last recording?
I've been great. Yeah, it's been a good start to the year overall. But we are recording this on MLK Day, also
Mhm.
Inauguration Day here in the U.S., and we're just trying
Mhm.
to focus on the podcast today. Focus on the positives.
Yeah. We're
How
gonna
b-
focus on the podcast. I do want to talk about a couple of the real world things first.
sure.
One, the wildfires in LA. We have a lot of friends and family who have been affected by those.
Hmm.
Fortunately, at this point, they're all safe, and I think their homes are all safe as well. But obviously, a completely devastating disaster caused by many, many factors, but absolutely exacerbated by climate change. And
Yes.
I'm going to do my best to find as many resources to link in the description below. If you have money to donate to any of the causes, if you're in the area and have time to volunteer, please do that. Items to donate. A lot of people have lost everything. Um, Look into fostering a pet as
Yeah.
well. A lot of animals were abandoned or lost in the fires.
Mm.
Just when things like this happen, it's incumbent on all of us to do everything we can to help the people in need. So that's one thing.
Yeah.
You have
That's
anything
good.
you want to say about
Thank.
the
No,
fires?
thank you for saying that. Yeah, that's. I sometimes forget about it. It's easy when you're living kind of far away from where it's happening. So I thank you
Yeah.
very much for bringing that up because yeah, we do have some family and friends who live out that way, and yeah, thankfully everyone is safe that we know. But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
plenty of people are not, and plenty of people
Yeah.
have lost a lot.
And to touch on what you just said too, like it's easy to forget when it's not in your backyard. But
Yes.
it was just a tweet from a while back, but I think it encapsulates this whole issue very perfectly. And it's that climate change will manifest as a series of disasters viewed through your phone until you are the one filming it.
Mm.
Um,
Hmm.
it it is or getting closer and closer to where you live until you're the one filming it. It's something that it will not impact everybody at the same time in the same way, but eventually it will come for us all. It is a problem that needs to be solved, and we're on the clock to solve it, and we're not doing enough. Um,
Yes.
but yeah, and some, I guess, good news for now. In contrast to that, there is a ceasefire in Gaza
Yeah.
um, for the moment.
It is.
But yeah, I mean, hope to whatever god you believe in, if you do, that it's fucking over and there can start to be some rebuilding for the Palestinians and some legal accountability for both the American and Israeli government and military officials that did this genocide. There is a reckoning due, and hopefully it comes, but
Yeah.
don't hold your breath.
Yes. No. Absolutely. It's totally agree with that, and I'm happy to see that yes, hostages are being released, being reunited
Hmm.
with people.
On
That
both
is
sides, yeah.
yes, exactly on both sides. People are getting reunited with the people that they love, so that's
Hmm.
great too. Glad to see that.
Yes, of course. Like everyone wanted the hostages that Hamas took to be returned. Like,
one Hundred
there's
percent.
nobody who didn't want that. Even Hamas wanted that. They
Mm-hmm.
offered to return them on October 9th. But in addition to that, many of the 9,000 Palestinian hostages that Israel has been keeping for years without charge have started to be returned as well. Like, we can only hope that the peace holds and that there will eventually be a solution.
Yes.
But then the real world thing is, of course, the Donald Trump inauguration today. I don't know if you saw this, but Elon Musk sig heiled twice on stage at the inauguration. Um,
Fuck.
no, like, and I'm not just I do not say that lightly because like people waving in a weird way can sometimes be freeze framed to look
Mm-hmm.
in. No, it was very distinctive. He paused and he did it twice.
That's very upsetting. I did not see that. Well,
Yeah.
well, fuck. That that's not great. Not a good sign
Mhm.
moving forward
No,
into the year.
no. Yeah, everybody's gotta watch each other's backs, take care of each other, especially the most marginalized people in your communities. They will be the first and most hard hit by what is to come. Take care of your people. They will need you, and you will need to take care of yourself as well. But enough of that for now. There will be more of it to come, I'm sure. But we review movies on this podcast. We're
Yes.
fine. It may not seem like that, but that is what we do. And this week, we are taking a look at Nosferatu. Niles, would you like to give us a little rundown on this film?
Yes, and we are talking about the 2024 Nosferatu,
Yes.
which is a remake by Robert Eggers of the 1922 film
hmm
Nosferatu: A Symphony of Horror, which is based
Yes.
on Bram Stoker's 1897 novel Dracula. Um,
hmm
it is
It is an
unauthorized.
unauthorized, yeah,
Yes, unauthorized
unauthorized.
adaptation of the novel. Yeah, there's a very interesting story behind there too, which we may talk about here. Um,
hmm
but this version of Nosferatu is very similar to the original. It's crazy to think that it's a whole century apart, over
Yeah.
100 years difference. But this one is set in Transylvania and Germany in the 1830s. It's an American gothic horror film, and it's about a very disturbing vampire who's infatuated with a young woman, and this leads to all manner of terrifying horror, death, and heartbreak. The basic synopsis:
hmm
Thomas Hunter, he's an estate agent in Germany, and he's married to Ellen. And he travels to Transylvania to meet with a prospective client, Count Orlok, who wishes to move to Germany for
hmm
Thomas's wife, Ellen. She becomes increasingly plagued.
Unbeknownst to him, yeah.
Yes, yeah, unbeknownst to him, beknownst to her, somewhat. But yeah, all kinds of shit goes wrong. She becomes increasingly plagued with horrific visions, and soon the evil force Orlok becomes all too real and beyond her control or anyone else's control.
hmm
And whole lots of blood sucking and death come about. The film
Yeah.
is written and directed by Robert Eggers, stars Lily Rose Depp, Nicholas Hoult, Bill Skarsgård, Willem Dafoe, Ralph Ineson, Innocent.
Ralph
I'm sorry,
Ineson.
Innocent.
Ralph
Thank
Ineson.
you.
Uh-huh.
Emma Corrin, Aaron Taylor Johnson, and Simon McBurney. Dylan, what are your thoughts on Nosferatu?
Before I get to that one, we actually have done an episode on one of Robert Eggers' films before. We did an episode on The Northman a little while back. If I remember, I'll link that in the description as well. But that was a fun episode. We liked that movie a lot, and I thought this was great. I still
Mm-hmm.
need to watch The Witch, but I have greatly enjoyed all of the Eggers films that I've seen.
Mm-hmm.
I also realized watching this that I didn't really know what the narrative of Dracula was before. I like Dracula, Van Helsing, and a lot of the characters that are in this story. Like they're just such fixtures of pop culture and appear in so many different stories outside of this initial context that I didn't know this narrative. So the film was kind of my introduction to this story, despite its
Oh.
differences from
Mm-hmm.
the original Dracula story. And I kind of enjoyed every aspect of it. There's a really low color saturation here that I thought worked tonally very well, and also at times almost gave the film a black and white look,
Yeah.
which was really neat, especially since the original film was a silent black and white film from the 20s.
Mm-hmm.
Sound and music was amazing, and like all of Eggers' films, the production design in Nosferatu was incredible and gave every location in the film like a really strong sense of place and the impression that it's like heavily lived in with a real history.
Mm-hmm.
Performances overall very strong as well, especially Lily Rose Depp. And I would recommend this a lot. I think it's great, but also look up what it is first, because
Yeah.
several people walked out of our theater yesterday when I was the second time I saw it and the first time for you, but two
Mm-hmm.
people walked out like a minute into the movie.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, on the one hand, what are you doing? What did
Yeah.
you know anything about what you were seeing? And but on the other hand, it's like, oh, I guess this really wasn't for you, and I'm sorry that you spent your money on it. But Niles,
Yeah.
what about you? What are your initial no spoiler thoughts on Nosferatu?
Yeah, that was like so funny when those like 2 minutes in after the opening sequence, it's just like you and I looked at each other like, what? What movie did they think they were seeing? Like,
Uh-huh.
I don't know. I guess some people just probably aren't familiar with Nosferatu in general, but like,
Yeah.
come on, it's part of like the culture at this point. You've seen the
Yeah.
images, like even if you haven't seen the movie, like I have seen the original movie, and
Mm-hmm.
it is definitely difficult to compare the movies because
Mm-hmm.
over 100 years have elapsed. They're
Right.
it's black and white. There's no there's no audio except I think there is
Hmm.
music from my recollection, but
Yeah, or there was, but there are no official copies that remain. They were
mm,
mostly all destroyed, I believe. So everything that
right.
exists is like bootleg put together. Which so the condition, like it's a miracle that the movie still exists, especially with how many movies from the silent era. And I think we've talked about this on the show before, but I think it's like half of the films from the silent era are completely gone or lost
Hmm.
media, and it's really incredible that it exists at all. But
Yeah, right. But yeah, it's I really did love this film, and it's this one is 100 times creepier, scarier, and spookier than the version of Nosferatu that I saw from
Okay.
1922. But yeah, again, it's not really fair comparison because so much time has elapsed. They're so
Hmm.
different in kind of medium and everything. But if you're a true cinema fan, I'd encourage you to check out the original because it is still creepy. Like the original
Yeah.
Nosferatu creature, Count Orlok in that movie, he's very creepy. They did a good job with it for the
Hmm.
time, but I really do love Robert Eggers' films. Nosferatu, this one is no exception. And like you said, we've talked about The Northman before. That was our 34th episode, so I'd encourage everyone to go check that
Oh
one
my
out.
god.
Yeah, right. Over 70 episodes, or about 70 episodes ago.
Yeah,
It's
that's crazy.
time flies. But yeah, all of his films, I think, there's he's so good at just like bringing you to this historical period of time. Like
Hmm.
it's so vastly different from what we experience today. He's just got this uncanny ability to fully transport us to these distant times. These environments feel
Hmm.
so real, so authentic, lived in, like you were saying. All of his films have this very dark, foreboding tone, with also very unique monochromatic imagery too. Like
Hmm.
there's still color for sure, but like in most of them, except for the Lighthouse, I think Lighthouse is just like all black
Lighthouse
and
is black and
white.
white. Yeah.
But like the other ones, there's still some color, but it's very washed out, and I really like that about them. Like he does
Hmm.
horror very well. The characters, they always speak like not like we do today. They speak
Hmm.
very of the era, um, almost kind of like Shakespeare in a way. And I think we
Yeah.
talked about
It's
that
like
with the
period
Northman.
accurate, right?
Yeah, very period
Yeah.
accurate uh, way of speaking. They dress how you'd expect. The stories are very cerebral, they're epic, and they're
Hmm.
truly horrific too. Um, I think Northman was probably not as like scary. I would say it was more of
Hmm.
like just this retelling of Amleth,
Yes.
the story that Hamlet was based on. Um, and I think it's really cool to see him progressing as a director too, because The Witch and The Lighthouse were so original and creative. Like they were his own
Hmm.
stories; they weren't necessarily based on anything. And then now these last two films that he did are like his own adaptations of these very culturally significant pieces of art. And he's just
Hmm.
kind of injecting his own creativity into it, which is just so great to see him do that. And because he's got a real knack for it, in my opinion.
Hmm.
But yeah, I loved this movie. I was in awe from start to finish. Such cool visuals. It's such a great monster movie. I was enthralled by everything, from the costume design, spooky atmospheres, the slow building tension.
Hmm.
I think if I did have one issue with the movie, it would just be like I think it could have been maybe 10 minutes shorter, but
Okay.
I don't know where you would cut out anything because
Yeah.
it all felt pretty integral. Like maybe
Hmm.
if you really wanted to do something, maybe cut out a little bit of the voyage, like on the ship and everything. But I really liked that stuff too, and
Yeah.
it's really just awesome.
Hmm. Yeah, and I wanted to go back to something you said earlier, just about like this one being much scarier and creepier than the one in the 20s, and it just it kind of reminded me of, because horror and comedy have a lot in common with each
Hmm.
other, and it kind of reminded me of how sometimes people say like, oh, this comedy movie from like 90 years ago just isn't funny anymore or something, but it's like, and I haven't seen the 22 Nosferatu, and I haven't seen a lot of old horror,
Yeah.
but it could just be that, like comedy, horror changes over time. So for the people of the 1920s, this was truly terrifying. And it's just
Mm-hmm.
the way we are scared by media has evolved in the last century. And so maybe this one wouldn't be as scary to them as that one was to them. And you never know.
For sure. Well, I mean, you just think about the future too. Like in 80 years from now, will people look back
Mhm.
at this film and be like, "Oh, that is so antiquated at this point.
Yeah.
Like it's just not scary
Mhm.
anymore." And like when you think back to like even oh god, what's the Bates Motel movie? What is that one?
Oh, Psycho?
Psycho, thank you. Like that is still a scary movie. But
Mhm.
like when you compare it to some of the other work that's being produced today, it's like it's it's not as scary as when it came out. You know, like
Yeah.
Hitchcock's a legend. You know, he did a
Mhm.
fantastic job with that movie, and there's still some really great effects in it, and it's really still very creepy and foreboding. But like when you compare it to like something like It Follows from today, like I think It
Mhm.
Follows is one of the best horror movies of our time, and
Okay.
it's just like not even really a fair comparison in a way
Yeah,
too.
it speaks to sensibilities that are different than like Psycho would have, right? And but also another thing like about horror that I think a lot of people get wrong and we've probably gotten wrong too. It's like it's not just about scaring you
Yes.
necessarily. I don't find this film particularly terrifying. There are a couple like jump scares that pop out, but that's not the core of what it's about, really.
Hmm.
Horror is a genre that is much more vast than just attempts to make you feel fear, right?
Yeah.
Um, and this movie has so much more going on than just that. But do you have anything else you'd like to say before spoilers, or should we hop on over?
Let's hop into spoilers. Why not?
All
Let's get into
right.
it.
All right. So I wanted to. So, like I said, I had not seen or read Dracula before,
Hmm.
but I thought it would be fun ahead of this episode to at least familiarize myself with one version of it. So I
Yeah.
watched Francis Ford Coppola's 1992 film, Bram Stoker's Dracula,
Hmm.
starring Winona Ryder and Gary Oldman and Keanu Reeves and Anthony Hopkins. And
Cool.
yeah, so I'll talk about it in other stuff later on, my thoughts on the actual movie, but I thought it would be fun to, because Nosferatu is an unlicensed adaptation of Dracula, run through some of the things that are actually different
Hmm.
from at least the 1992 version of Dracula. So in Nosferatu, Ellen, our main character, knows Orlok from her past, whereas Mina in Dracula does not seem to personally know Dracula. She seems kind of aware that his presence is out there, but she is like a reincarnation or something of Dracula's long lost love from
Mm.
before he was a vampire. Which is something that is an element of that Dracula Untold movie that we saw many years ago with
Oh
Luke
my
Evans.
god. I forgot about
Um,
that.
yeah, it's a forgettable movie.
It
But
really is. Yeah.
um, also in Dracula, there is an American cowboy who is a character who does not make the jump into, I think, any version of Nosferatu, unfortunately, because it's just a fun character to have. And in the Coppola movie, it's not Mina, but her friend who has the like bouts of possession throughout the story.
Mm.
Mina in that movie, at least, doesn't have any sort of thing with that. And her storyline is really more about a romance with Dracula. He appears in London and just sort of like presents himself as young Gary Oldman, and they like go on dates and get to know each other a little bit while Jonathan Harker is just having the worst fucking time of his life back in Transylvania. And and the way they defeat him almost feels in part like an effort by Mina to somehow redeem his soul in a little bit. It's
Mm.
less about just defeating this monster, and it kind of gives the impression that maybe Dracula is at peace at the end as he dies.
Mm.
And then the biggest structural change is just Nosferatu. This version at least ends with Ellen calling him and then keeping him with her all night until the sun rises. That is not how Dracula 92 ends. In that one, they like have a whole part of the movie where they're racing Dracula back to Transylvania from London,
Yeah.
and the final confrontation is at his castle. So and I think I was surprised by that, and so it caught me off guard. For Nosferatu, at least this version, I think the way this movie ended was exactly correct for this story. I
Yeah.
liked that stuff in Dracula, but I think it would have been out of place in this film.
I
So yeah.
agree. Yeah, and I haven't seen that retelling of Dracula, but it sounds, because I've read the book. I read
Hmm.
Dracula. It's pretty good book, honestly. It's very
Yeah.
suspenseful. It builds. Um, but yeah, it was written in a very different era, and
Hmm.
it's very
Like
male dominated.
1892, 97.
Uh, I mean, the book. Let's see.
Oh, you
The
say up
book
here
was
1897.
1897. Yeah. So I mean, it's really like, from my recollection, it's been years since I've watched it, but that sounds like, or read it. That version, that Francis Ford Coppola film, it sounds very accurate for the most part. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, I do remember them going back to Transylvania. Van Helsing's in it, and
Yeah.
he's like, it's like kind of this whole self-discovery tale of like, okay, now we gotta like figure out how do we kill this thing. It's like
Hmm.
this incarnation of pure evil, but like, he really leans into like the hypnotizing people, the dominion over animals, to like, there's
Yeah.
whole lots of different kinds of cool elements within the story, but it is like very male driven. The women are kind of
Hmm.
treated more as objects, of like desire, and that's
Hmm.
kind of the whole thing. But that sounds pretty accurate from my recollection of the novel. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah,
Yeah.
Nosferatu's very different
Hmm.
version of Dracula. It just
Hmm.
really is, and I really do like this iteration of it. Um, I agree with you. I think that the ending of this movie, it feels very appropriate.
Yes. And I want to say too, the atmosphere in this film is just so fantastic. Like the everything about it, but like there's a scene where Thomas is at the crossroads to get picked up by Orlok's carriage, and it's just so eerie and beautiful. And also notice there's a lot of cross imagery hidden throughout the movie that I noticed on this time around. And
Mm,
the crossroads as Thomas is walking down them, it's like an upside down cross, with the crossbar at
yeah, that's a very
the
good
frame.
observation.
And that imagery appears throughout. I don't remember if vampires are associated with upside down crosses at all. I don't think they are, but I know cross imagery is very important in vampire stories because that's kind of one of the ways you fight back against them. Is
Yes, yeah, because they are basically, yeah, they made a deal with the devil to
mm-hmm.
kind of get this prolonged life. Yeah, I should really reread Dracula because it's a really good book.
I need
But
to
yeah,
read
that
it as
whole
well.
scene, so eerie, and I just love how the carriage door opens and it's like,
Mm-hmm.
there's no driver, there's no one in here. These horses came because Orlok just told them to go. He
Mm-hmm.
has this dominion, and then the wolves are chasing them back to just make sure they get back to the castle. Like that whole sequence is so spooky, and then everything in the castle itself,
Mm-hmm.
oh, it's so spooky. All the
Yeah.
shadows, like he's just waking up, he can't tell when he's been dreaming or not, and
Mm-hmm.
he's got these bite marks on him. He's like, what the hell, how the what's going on in here?
Mm-hmm. And that there's no one else at the castle. There's not.
Yeah.
Orlok says like my attendants have all retired for the night, and it's like there's nobody there.
Yeah, right. It's so spooky. And like
Mm-hmm.
he gets like, Thomas has like no daylight too, which is, it's like a very brief window of time, which I thought was so
Mm-hmm.
interesting. Like he finds where Orlok's sleeping, he's ready to like kill him, but like you can kind of see in the background like the sun is slowly fading
Mm.
away, and he's almost got the
Oh.
death blow. Like if you just went a few seconds earlier, perfect, but like he just
Oh, I didn't
hesitated.
catch that. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah, okay. So like Orlok must be doing something to him that's keeping him like ill and asleep for the daylight hours, so he can't really make any real moves. Okay,
Yeah,
that's
I think
fun.
so. Like, yeah, there's some kind of hypnosis going on there, but
Mm-hmm.
also like he's draining him of his blood too. So
Yeah. Well, and then I love it's like I really have to get going. Like I'm just not feeling well. It's like it's a bad omen to travel while you're sick. I order you to stay. And it's like how right.
I can't beat him. What is he? He's got me at every turn.
Let's play once
um,
again.
it's so good, and I love um, how Eggers depicts Orlok moving in this movie
Mm-hmm.
too. Like he's always just kind of like in shadow, like it's just the shadows moving, or like you
Mm-hmm.
can see him like through the window, like the shadow coming in, or like through
Yeah.
the drapery or something like that. He's
Mm-hmm.
gliding from room to room without having this physical form, and I think that's just so great, and that's very true to like like Dracula within the story, like in the
Mm-hmm.
novel. Like he's not always physical. He can kind of evaporate and become a bat or turn into mist.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's
Yes.
ethereal.
Yeah. In the Coppola version, it's really cool. And like in a lot of scenes, Dracula's shadow will not line up on the walls with where Gary Oldman is standing. It kind of moves independently of him or in the wrong
Cool.
ways. It's very neat. I think you'd like that film a lot. But I think depicting him as a shadow and keeping him in shadow for much of the runtime was just pretty effective. His design is gross and scary too, but I think as we see a lot of the times in horror, sometimes the unseen is scarier than what you can see, and just watching characters react to his presence is better in a lot of instances. I
Mm-hmm.
Shadow. I also love that shot of Orlok, his shadow extending over the whole city as like a claw as he's reaching out towards Ellen, like calling out to her.
So
It's just,
cool.
it's so neat. And I also love the shot of them riding down the canal to go kill him with their torches in the little boat, and they're going down the same canal way that his helper transported his sarcophagus down earlier in the movie. It gave a really good. I think it's just a cool shot, and it's the start of the climax, but also tying it back to Orlok's arrival really sort of elevated it to me a little bit. It's like, it's like coming back, but now I don't even know how to explain what I'm trying to say, but it just added an extra layer of escalation to me that
Yeah.
I thought was neat.
Yeah. Well, I think it kind of goes back to like the original Dracula of how it's like, okay, now we got to go back to Transylvania, chase him back to
Mm-hmm.
the castle. So it's like you're
Yeah.
kind of just retracing your steps to get back to like where it
Mm-hmm.
all began, so you could end it. Like I really liked that shot too. Like Eggers has a really he's kind of got like a symmetrical um he really likes symmetry, I think, in a lot of
Mm-hmm.
his shots, which I also really enjoy too. So
Yeah.
I really like those shots. And I one of my favorite scenes of the movie was when Thomas arrives at the peasant village at like the
Mm-hmm.
foot of Orlok's castle, and they're all just
Yep.
like dancing and laughing at him and issuing these warnings in a language he doesn't understand. Like he's
Mm-hmm.
just so out of his element, and it's
Yep.
just a grand old time. I just love that.
Yeah. Well, and if you notice too, one of the old ladies in the inn that he's staying in at night, she's shaking garlic at the windows as she's
Yeah.
doing her like ritual or whatever to keep, because garlic is one of the things that it either keeps vampires away or it can be used to protect you against them. I forget exactly what the
Yeah,
thing is.
it's like garlic and silver like will keep them at bay, basically.
Silver, crosses, and garlic are like the
Hmm.
main things, and then
Yeah.
the stake through the heart, obviously, which they do with, I guess, another vampire in the woods.
Yeah, they do.
So yeah, and I guess virgins protect you too, because they just bring that girl who's a virgin on the horse. It looks like they're gonna sacrifice her, but no, she's just there, and
Yeah.
they stake that vampire through the heart.
Yeah, that was very odd, but I was like, okay, all right, good that she wasn't a sacrifice. She's just
Mm-hmm.
vibing with the
Yeah.
villagers.
Yeah, and speaking of just in general, the performances, Lily Rose Depp, I think, is the standout performance here. She's really good.
Yeah, she really brought a lot to it, and I really liked her character, but she's also was phenomenal. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and like when I was doing a little bit of research ahead of this, like all those like possession sequences where she's like kind of seizuring or doing like these
Uh-huh.
crazy fucking movements, like all her, no CGI at
Yeah.
all. Like
Mm-hmm.
they brought in a movement coach. Like I found this interview on Mary Claire magazine where they were talking
Mm-hmm.
to the movement coach. Her last name's Roti, and she tapped into this Japanese dance art form called Buto,
Okay.
which
Mm-hmm.
is described as the dance of utter darkness. I think that's kind of what it's called sometimes. And I found this quote that I thought was very interesting from that interview where Roti's talking about it, and she's like, I was really interested in the medicalization of Ellen's body, that
Mm-hmm.
her body is literally corseted up all the time. And you see in these movements, she's just like ripping it off. She's like trying to
Yeah.
get out of it. Like she's very controlled and repressed,
Mm-hmm.
laced up, buttoned up. And I thought that that was very interesting that she brought that up. And in my opinion, I think they really used the movement, like this crazy little like seizure movements, these sporadic movements, to communicate
Mm-hmm.
Ellen's repression, her desire,
Yeah.
and kind of the inner darkness that was growing inside of her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and that ties in heavily with the themes of the movie. Like we have isolation, sacrifice, repression, especially very specifically when it comes to female sexuality and autonomy. Um, it's yeah, it ties in with the time, but also just repression of women in general. But you want to touch on that for a
Yeah,
second?
yeah. Because yeah, Ellen's like her whole character is just like controlled by men in her life, like Thomas, Orlok, um, Thomas's friend, whose name I'm blanking on right now.
Oh, Harden.
Harden, was that it?
It's Friedrich Harden, I think.
Right. Okay. But yeah, like her health, her security,
Mm-hmm.
her freedom, it's all like at the whims of the men in her life. And like, yeah, like her health concerns, they're like constantly dismissed as like melancholy, hysteria, mental instability. Like it's very of its time, in a way. Um, and like it's just kind of heartbreaking to see that happening to her when it's like there's something more going on here and no one's listening to the women in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
Like everyone's just like, no, you're just crazy, you're just acting crazy, just get
Yep.
yourself out of this melancholy. It's like, no,
Mm-hmm.
there's something more here, dude, come on, listen.
Right. Well, and it's just like the repression element of it too. When she opens up to Thomas about
Hmm.
her, it's about her dreams and like holding hands with death and being happy. Um, Instead of like, and he's the most sympathetic to her outside of von Franz later,
Hmm.
but I think he's loves her and everything, but he's like never speak of this to anybody. That's his first response. It's like keep that shit to yourself. This is not for speaking about. This is
Hmm.
weird. Um, and it just repression. It runs through the whole thing.
Yeah, exactly. Like all the men, like before they get the professor involved,
Mm-hmm.
um, they're like, okay, how do we treat this? Okay, let's tie her up down to the bed. Let's give her some mind-numbing drugs, some ether, and they're
Mm-hmm.
not actually trying to cure the malady or anything. They're just like, no, she's just going crazy. She's
Yeah.
just hysterical, and it's it's just repression. It's suppression of her
Yeah.
and her own kind of inner workings, her personality, her in general, and
Mm-hmm.
she had great agency in this movie, um, and she ultimately at the end she determines, uh, what how do we stop Orlok, and she ultimately takes the burden upon herself to make the
Mm-hmm.
sacrifice of her life because she's like, we're just
Yeah.
intertwined at this
Mm-hmm.
point, and I need to kind of make this the ultimate play, and it's a much better conclusion to this story than the original Dracula because it's just like the men are doing everything in that movie or in
Mm-hmm.
that book. I can't remember what happened in that movie obviously because I didn't see it, but they just
Yeah.
they're doing everything to save the
Mm-hmm.
day, and the women are just like the objects that they're trying to control and save. And
Mm-hmm.
it's nice to see Ellen having more agency.
Yeah. Well, it works, and it works better in a modern retelling of the story.
Yes.
Obviously, like we're not going to knock points off of Bram Stoker's 1897 novel for being
Hmm.
more male centric than a modern story, but it works in this way, and also not only does it give Ellen more agency, but based solely on the two versions that I have seen now, this Nosferatu and the '90s Dracula. Um, the Mina or Ellen character just has a more interesting and fleshed out relationship with the vampire of the story. So her having that critical role, in this case, the primary role in his downfall,
Mm-hmm.
just kind of feels dramatically right. And to be clear, Mina is heavily involved in the climax of the 1992 film as well. But I really like the idea that this one plays with, where the whole hunt for Dracula is it's a farce. It's there to keep Thomas away from Ellen so she can do what she knows she needs to. And
Yeah.
she and Von Franz came up with this idea together. He's like, I'll keep him occupied. You save us. And I just think that's a very fitting climax for this version of the story. Um, and, but yeah.
I mean, yeah, you're totally right. Because yeah, I do love that scene where yeah, it's Ellen and the professor are talking,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, they kind of come up with that separate real plan. Like they both have. He was the only one, the only man in the entire story who actually like took the time to listen to Ellen and
Mm-hmm.
trust her thoughts. Like Professor Franz, like he didn't brush her off and be like, "Oh,
Yeah.
this is just about a melancholy." Like
Mm-hmm.
he was interested in the occult. He was interested in like figuring out what this otherworldly stuff was, and he saw her as another human being and wanted to help her. It was he was a homie for real, and
Yeah.
uh, he kind of saved the day in a way by just being like, "Yeah, I'm gonna listen to you. You know
Mm-hmm.
what you're talking about, and I trust you."
Yeah, and jumping ahead a little bit, just because I find it that's true, and we like Von Franz the most out of all the male characters, probably for that reason, right? But like to be fair to Dr. Sievers, he is presenting progress in like a traditional sense as well. Like he's not using the hospital as when they lock up Orlok's guy in the cell, he's
Mm-hmm.
like, I told you we are not using those rooms anymore. This is a modern hospital. This is not a prison. Like he's trying to move forward and be more enlightened in his own way. It's just like the shit he's dealing with here is outside of his understanding.
Yeah.
Um, and then on that note, it's like Harding is somewhat of a like an ass to everybody in the movie, but one thing I did find very humanizing about him is when his wife gets sick after Orlok attacks her and is
Yeah.
dying. Um, he just has this moment of frustration with Sievers and Von Franz, who are all in on the idea that this is Nosferatu, that this is a vampire, and he just loses it, and he's like, "This is a real plague, and real
Mm-hmm.
people are dying. Focus on like the real shit that we're dealing with, and
Right.
maybe it's just in like our modern context of having gone through a very devastating pandemic and having a lot of people who presented themselves as like snake oil salesmen throughout it. I found that frustration very humanizing for this character, because he's just like, no, this is the science problem, we need to focus on the solution here.
Mm-hmm.
And like, if you're a doubter of this supernatural thing existing in your city, that's a totally reasonable reaction. Your wife
Yeah.
is in the room dying, and these two people are talking about a fucking vampire. Like, I would be pissed off too, you know?
Yeah. Oh yeah. And everyone's dying in the streets. There's rats everywhere. Like
Mm-hmm.
people are like it feels like the end of the world. It's like no, this is we've seen this before. This is the
Yeah.
plague. This is
Mm-hmm.
a disease come to the city. Like he's yeah, I agree with you. That was a
Yeah.
humanizing moment for him
Yeah.
for sure.
But I do really love that scene where Ellen and Von Franz talk separately from all the others and just sort of come up with the real plan to defeat Orlok, because they've come to this understanding together, and they know that no one else is going to understand. And
Mm-hmm.
I just it was just a nice moment of camaraderie between the two of them. And I liked God, I should have looked up, what was Isis the goddess of?
Oh, I want to say fertility, but I could be wrong. I'm
Let's
probably
see.
wrong.
Um, she was the goddess of. Da, 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 da. Come on, just
We're
tell
gonna
me what
find
you.
it.
Yeah, I'm on Wikipedia. The hell? Tell me. She was an Egyptian goddess. Practices. God, Wikipedia, be more helpful. Possible influence on Christian. whatever, doesn't matter. I just
Doesn't
love the
matter.
line. It's like, in another life, you could have been a wonderful priestess of Isis, but today you're the one who will save us all. Like, I don't know. I thought their relationship was very um, sweet and genuine and just trusting, you
I
know?
agree. Yeah, and I really like that scene too, just for the general aesthetics of it too, like
Mm-hmm.
the snow, like falling in the background,
Yeah.
like very empty streets, and just you just got
Mm-hmm.
that beautiful shot of Lily Rose Depp with the beautiful headpiece on. It's
Yeah.
just
The funeral headpiece. Yeah.
it is beautiful. Like she looks so great in that. But throughout this movie, there's a lot of isolation too. That's a pretty
Mm-hmm.
prominent theme too. Like
Yes.
Ellen and Thomas, they were physically isolated from each other throughout a large portion of this
Mm-hmm.
movie, and it's just a very common theme through here too. Like also Professor Franz, he was isolated for his beliefs and he was kind of ostracized from the world of academia, from society, because
Mm-hmm.
he was like, I'm interested in the occult and trying to figure out what
Yeah.
this otherworldly shit is
Alchemy.
going
Yeah.
on. Like, yeah, he's
Mm-hmm.
like, he was trying to explore these things that everyone kind of frowned upon. And I thought he was a really cool character, but the isolation is really present in this movie.
Yes, and Orlok even tries to emotionally isolate Ellen from Thomas as he's manipulating her, which is like a tactic that abusers use, right? They isolate
Yeah.
their victim from the people around them who love them and make them feel like they're unloved. And he's doing that. He's trying to tell her that Thomas sold her to him for gold, basically. And when we know that the contract that Thomas signed was one, he thought it was like documentation for the factory deed, and it was in a language that he didn't speak, and he's
Mm-hmm.
just forced to sign it. So it's but like the isolation and repression thing too, like Orlok is only brought back into the world
Mm-hmm.
because of Ellen's isolation when she was younger, right? She said that she yearned for company and she just called out to anyone. She was like a guardian angel, whatever. Just and then it's that wakes Orlok from his slumber, and
Mm-hmm.
he's the one who comes to her, becoming this curse on her that she can't speak of to anybody because who would believe her, and she sees him as her shame because there was a sexual component as well. She at first found it sweet, and then it became controlling and abusive, and she shed him away.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but all this sort of makes me think too, just about repression and how even in today's society, this is why things like sexual education for youth is important. You teach them about the things their body is going through and the
Mm-hmm.
feelings they're feeling so that they are better educated and prepared. Otherwise, they might take a risk and end up in a situation that they're not prepared for or is too dangerous for them.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, not summoning a nasty vampire who's going to be an abuser to you, but there are consequences to these types of things, and in order to practice them safely, you need to be educated on it. So that's sexuality should not be repressed. It should be expressed and guided in
Hundred
responsible ways.
percent.
That's sort of
Hundred
made me think
percent.
about
Yeah.
we were talking about this. Yeah, and this doesn't have to do with this film specifically, but another thing I just found enjoyable was I just really liked that we had seen the film The Last Voyage of the Demeter, because it just added that extra little bit to that sequence of the voyage over from Transylvania, because it was like, oh, we're returning to that story, but now in the context of the full
Mm-hmm.
narrative of which it's a part. And it just, because otherwise the film doesn't linger on these characters all that much. They're not really part of the story, but we have an emotional connection to versions of them because we got a whole movie about it, and that was just kind of a fun thing.
Yeah, I was thinking about that on all of those like ship sequences where they're just like, oh, there's a plague. One of their crew members is dying, and then the guy's like,
Mm-hmm.
he knows what the issue is. He's like, I'm gonna go kill that thing, whatever the fuck it
Yeah.
is. It's like, and
Mm-hmm.
then the ship eventually just crashes on shore because all
Yeah.
the crew members are dead. Like, that movie's awesome, by the way. Yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
think I would definitely recommend going checking out. Yeah, The Last Voyage of the Demeter. It was really
Mm-hmm.
fun. Yeah, it was really neat.
Yep. I also found it interesting how much Orlok found the people of his own country to be backwards, and he regarded their traditions and superstitions with disgust, probably in part because they were about destroying him. But he desired to be amongst like the more modern society in Germany and was eager to escape from his backwards place. And it kind of relates back to how von Franz says that, like, in their era of enlightenment and modernity, like, they've forgotten things that are important to deal with the world that they find themselves in. And yeah, so it's like Orlok, maybe as a survival mechanism, wants to go to a more modern society that does not know the ways to defeat something like him because he has no place in the world of modern like medicine. He's
Yeah,
outside of that world.
yeah, I definitely
Uh,
see that. Yeah, that was interesting. Yeah, just how quickly he was like, "No, we're not going to talk about those peasants. Fuck the peasants,"
mhm.
in the castle.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Hmm.
this is a really fun movie. It's very atmospheric. Um, so it's kind of surprising to me sometimes when I go online and I read complaints about movies that I like, like this one. Like
Hmm.
sometimes I feel like they're justified, and I don't think that this movie is necessarily for everyone. Like we were just talking about at the start, there were a few people who left the theater within just a few minutes. Like
Yeah.
I don't know if that they were in the wrong screening, or like if they thought that they were in the wrong theater, or they just had a different idea of what this movie was going to be. But like
I think there
if you've
was the
seen
jump scare of Orlok that was they just were not prepared for that specifically and how gross he was, and then they left.
Yeah, he's gnarly looking.
Hmm.
Yeah, they did a good job with the prosthetics and how gross he looked, and um,
Hmm.
but yeah, I don't think that it's necessarily for everyone. But it's like, yeah, if you're going into a Robert Eggers film, I feel like you probably know what you're getting into.
Yeah.
Hopefully, you've seen some of his work before, but like when I saw some reviews online, I did see some people complaining, like some negative reviews, and
Hmm.
I'm I just kind of want to summarize them really quickly. Like I feel like more or less what I saw people complaining about is like it's boring and there's an unsatisfying ending, or they
Hmm.
didn't feel very emotionally connected to the characters, or they were complaining about the sex scenes, that they were gross, I guess.
I
um,
mean, yeah, it is like kind of gross because Orlok's gross, but
yeah, that's kind of the point.
yeah. I mean,
uh,
it's a movie about like in large part repression of sexuality. Sex is a part of the story. I mean, we are seeing like a backlash to sex scenes and intimacy in film and TV in general from like
mhm,
younger cohorts of Gen Z specifically and maybe younger, and it's very unsettling, I'd say, because it's puritanical in nature, it's conservative attitudes leaping back in. And like
mhm,
guys, sex is a part of the human experience. If you're like asexual or something, that's valid as well. But a lot of relationships contain sex, and a lot of stories contain sex because that is just part of existing in human society. And to remove all of them from our films and television is wrong and
mhm.
unhealthy. It
Yeah,
it
well, and it's
just like what we were talking about a second ago with you need to have exposure to this type of stuff, otherwise it makes your navigating it in your own life more difficult.
right, yeah, and I mean, the sex symbolizes things, especially in
Hmm.
this movie. Like, it symbolizes things in the literature that this
Hmm.
movie was based on. Like, there's a reason why those things were included. It's because about purity or um, all different kinds of things that you could pull out of it. But like, yeah, like I just don't get some of these complaints, and like some of them are too just like aesthetics as well.
Hmm.
Like some people just complain about, oh, it's so dimly lit, and it's like, dude, come on, it's it's a dark
Was
horror
it?
movie.
I, I don't think it even was dimly lit. There are dark scenes, but the lighting I thought was very crisp and like
Yeah,
very
yeah,
deliberate. So
oh
I
yeah,
don't even agree with that at all. I thought the lighting was fantastic.
oh yeah,
It is low saturation in terms of color, but the
yeah.
lighting was pretty, and like that you can, your mileage will vary with saturation. Everybody has preferences. I think it was appropriate for this movie. Um, but yeah, the lighting I think was pretty objectively excellent.
Yeah, and I saw like one or two reviews like complaining about like, oh, it's just like sexist horror tropes are in this movie. I'm like, dude, like, have you ever read a Dracula story or watched a Dracula movie before? Like, this is kind of a critical they're like, yeah, there's some things that are kind of tropes in here, but they're tropes for a reason, and they work
Mm-hmm.
well in this movie. And like, so I don't
Yeah.
really agree with any of the complaints that I've seen online about this. And like I said, I don't think that this movie's for everyone. It's a gothic horror
Yeah.
period piece, basically. And
What
so if
what
you're,
what was the trope they had a problem with specifically? Like Ellen being the object of desire for this vampire? Was that
yeah, things like that, like that the women, all the women are dead by the end of the movie, kind of stuff like that. And it's like,
okay?
okay, I don't know if you really thought critically when you were watching this movie.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that almost makes it seem like they think this is a fridge, like an example of fridging,
Yeah,
which
exactly,
it
something like
it
that.
which maybe you can make the argument for the friend in relation to Hardin's story, but that's a
I
stretch,
don't.
and you definitely cannot make that argument for Ellen. That's just not how that trope
Yeah,
works. She is the main character of the story, and she makes a very active decision to do this sacrifice.
yeah,
That's like if I don't know if that's what they're saying specifically, but if they're saying this is an example of fridging, that's just incorrect.
yeah, exactly. Like I think that there's just like I think a lot of viewers probably went into this movie either with the wrong expectations,
Mm-hmm.
or I think just a lot of people are used to modern like A24 Blumhouse horror movies. Just like they have kind of different expectations for what a horror movie should be. They,
Yeah.
I don't know. I think that this is kind of like a small percentage of people who have seen this movie, because more
Mm-hmm.
or less most of the reviews I've seen have been pretty positive, like
Yeah,
just
it's gotten
calling
pretty
this,
good buzz.
yeah, like it's a masterpiece in my opinion. And
Mm-hmm.
like if you're going into this story looking for something that's different than a Dracula or a Nosferatu story, like I
Mm-hmm.
don't know what to tell you. Like you're gonna, this isn't the movie for you. But I could not recommend this movie more. It is fantastic.
Yeah, I thought it was great. I have very few. I have no complaints really.
Yeah.
I loved it. I thought it was fantastic, and I will say too. We'll talk about this more in other stuff as well. Um, like we are both progressive people on this podcast. We express those views very frequently. But even if
Mm-hmm.
this movie did have some problematic tropes in it, or had some politics maybe we don't agree with, you as a viewer need to be more discerning than requiring your media to preach your politics to you.
Mm-hmm.
Develop your understanding of what you believe and why, and then if a movie presents a worldview that is different from yours, be intellectually curious enough to engage with that and have a conversation with yourself about, okay, I found this compelling, but I find some of the politics of it a little iffy, a little, maybe even
Mm-hmm.
repulsive at times. And why am I still able to find this compelling? Why does it still move me? And if like if a political thing in a movie ruins it for you, I think that's valid too. In some cases, that there's no escaping it. It becomes too much of a thing, and it distracts you from the movie itself. But try to, when you're watching things, try to not let that happen. Try to meet the film on its own terms and engage with it as it is, and then
Yeah.
develop your ideas of it afterward. But yeah, that's all I got on Nosferatu. I think it was excellent.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to say?
No, just go check it out and check out other
Mm-hmm.
Robert Eggers films. They're so cool.
Yeah.
Atmospheric, creepy, fun. Just good
All right.
old fashioned fun.
Yeah. All right. Well, with that, let's transition into some other stuff. Just other things we were watching, reading, playing, whatever. Niles, what have you been up to the last couple weeks?
So I've continued on with my Game of Thrones rewatch. I'm halfway through season 6 now, so
Mm-hmm.
getting to the end of the golden era for sure of Game of
Yeah.
Thrones. But it's fun going back through it, and everything's lining up. It's making sense, and I really forgot how much I enjoy like the High Sparrow moments.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's kind of a cool. Juxtaposition against like the crown and everything we've gotten
Mm-hmm.
used to. Like it's a lot of fun. I'm liking it,
Yeah.
and probably gonna watch more of it tonight after we're done here.
Mm-hmm.
Um, uh, RuPaul's Drag Race is also back. I don't think I talked about that last time, but it's a fun season so far. There's plenty of drama this time again. Season 17. It's not wowing me as much as previous seasons, but
Oh no.
that's just my opinion. um, I've also been watching this true crime series called Wild Crimes, where they talk about these, like, it's every season's about like 4 episodes long,
Mm-hmm.
and they just focus on like a specific case or a series of cases that are connected in like national parks
Okay.
of the United States. And like I just watched one that was like connecting these various hiker disappearances slash murders that in Georgia, Florida kind of area, and some
Mm-hmm.
Pennsylvania, I think. Really interesting, just to kind of see how uh, like park rangers and like criminal investigation agencies work in these like
Mm-hmm.
very remote areas where there's like no surveillance. Like, how do you
Yeah.
find a hiker who went missing, or how do you figure out who killed this person? Like, it's very hard to piece together these things. So it's
Mm-hmm.
they're interesting stories for sure.
Cool.
Um, I also finished reading The Way of the Hermit, which is a very interesting series of memoirs by this man called Ken Williams. He's
Mm-hmm.
a hermit who's lived on his own for about
Uh-huh.
40 odd years in the Scottish Highlands.
Cool.
He's got some really cool stories about survivalism, but also just like reflections on life. And
Mm-hmm.
I think I probably talked about him before on this podcast, but he's not like thinking that he's superior to people or anything like that. Like, he's like, everyone just is trying to live, and I just like to live out in the wilderness away from people. And he's just got some really, really interesting stories. I highly, highly recommend it. Um, and I've started reading actually my sister's book. She published a book called Catalira, uh, and I'm about halfway through it so far. It's a lot of fun. It is
Nice.
about this very magical world, these magicians in training at this school called Grimaldi, um,
Mm-hmm.
various cool different types of magic that they're experimenting with, and it feels very like a theological kind of exploration too, of like gods and what it is to be alive, what's purpose at the end of the day. It's very fun so far, and I will always promote things that my siblings do. So definitely check out
Neat.
that book.
Yeah. Well, congrats to her. If you can send me the listing for it, I'll link it in the
Definitely,
description.
definitely. What have
Um,
you been up to?
but yeah, that's awesome. Congratulations for that. So I finished The Witcher: Sword of Destiny, the last short story book of The Witcher that I have, at least. I enjoyed it a lot. It sort of ties. It's sort of the stories that start tying like Geralt and Ciri together into the story that the novels um, carry or
Mm-hmm.
cover. I've read those already a long time ago. I have mixed feelings on them overall. I think the short story format, as I've said before, it just Sapkowski's writing just works better in short story format for whatever reason. But
Mm-hmm.
also alluded to already some films that don't always politically align with what I believe or seem to. I
Mm-hmm.
saw The Brutalist last week and with Adrian Brody, and so in the back half of that film, there's some shit about like immigrating to Israel and the Zionist project and stuff like that, and it's just every time that shit comes up, it takes me out a little bit because I know too much now. I understand too much about the dynamics of what happens over there for
Yeah.
it to feel like, oh yay, they're gonna go to Israel and it's gonna be great. It's like no, but The Brutalist is a fascinating movie, and I will also say it's come out that there was some use of, I think, generative AI in accent
Mm.
enhancement and some architectural designs, which is, if that is true in the way it's being
Mm.
presented, it's incredibly disappointing and makes the film lesser, in my opinion. But
Mm.
the first half, beyond aside from those things, the first half of The Brutalist is a fucking masterpiece. It is
Mm.
incredible. Um, it's about this guy, this architect who survived the Holocaust and immigrates to the United States and tries to start over life here. And it touches on so many interesting things. One about just like immigration to the U.S., how Americans in general treat immigrants and Jewish people specifically, especially back then, and also how when someone is a victim of an atrocity, even like to people who are otherwise attempting to be empathetic, this like erases the rest of their humanity. Like the rest of
Mm.
what they've done is surprising to people because it's like, well, it otherizes someone, to be
Mm.
a victim of this thing, and it people treat them differently and are shocked that they've accomplished great things or are highly educated, and stuff
Yeah.
like that. The second half I found far more uneven,
Hmm.
still very interesting, and a lot of the stuff I liked about the first half was still present, but there are some scenes I think we could have gone without. The themes are laid on a little bit thick in the back half, and then also the back half is where the Israel shit is most present. But
Gotcha.
I, you know, the generative AI thing really bugs me. But read about it and determine what you should do. I still think the film is very much worth watching. It's 3.5 hours long. Be warned, it has an actual intermission. Um, I found that experience very, very neat as well. We saw it at the Mayan, and the intermission comes up for 15 minutes. Everybody adjourns to the lobby. It felt very, like a play, like seeing a play at the
That's
theater. Everybody
cool.
little conversations about part one in the lobby while they were like topping up their drink or going to the bathroom and getting popcorn, and then everybody went back and watched the second half. So
That's really neat.
it's
I
it's
like
really
that.
neat. And I've said before that I like the concept of intermissions in very long movies, and I have been, corrected that not every movie has a place for an intermission, but this one did. Structurally, there was a very defined part
Yeah.
one and part two, and that it worked great for that. I also went to see Flow, which is an animated movie with no dialogue, and it follows a little
Hmm.
cat and some other animals, and basically the the water just starts rising all around them and creates this massive flood that keeps getting worse and worse, and the animals have to
Cool.
sort of figure out how to survive together and navigate this new landscape. And it was almost 90 minutes long and had no words, and it was beautiful, and it's so cute. And they're like whole little character arcs and relationships built, all done with the animation, and it's
Hmm.
really wonderful. I would recommend it.
That's
uh
yeah. I'm gonna check that out.
yeah, I think it's on digital download too if you want to watch it at home, but I went to see it in the theater because
Hmm.
it's still out as well. Also been playing Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, the new Indiana Jones game. Having a decent amount of fun with it. It's kind of like Dishonored without superpowers, but you're Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
So snooping around the Vatican, trying to uncover secrets, and yeah, it's a
I'm
good
into that.
time. Yeah. And then I finished the Star Wars Skeleton Crew show. Cute show. I liked it. I had no real interest in watching it going into it. It looked like it was very much for kids. It is, but it did kind of capture the sort of Treasure Island um, charm a little
Hmm.
bit. It's like
That's neat.
little children get swept up on a pirate adventure, but it's in Star Wars. And I like it was fun.
Cool. I might check that out still.
Yeah, it's like they accidentally. It's kind of a spoiler, but you find out in the opening episodes. It's like they live on this planet that's like 1980s suburbs, and then they accidentally get launched out of the planet and find themselves in like a pirate haven or whatever. And it turns out that the planet they're from is like the mythical lost treasure planet that all pirates have been like searching for and view as this myth that doesn't exist. And so they're they're trying to get back home, and people are maybe trying to help them a little bit, but maybe also just kind of want the treasure. And it's fun. I always am pushing for Star Wars to try new different things, and this
Hmm.
did. So I got credit where it's due. I also started Castlevania Nocturne season 2. So far so good. I like it. A lot of the Netflix animated stuff is kind of inconsistent, I think, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm hoping this proves to not be that. But it ties in with the first show now in ways that are kind of fun. And yeah, I was kind of in the mood for vampire media, so it was nice that it came out
Yeah.
around this time. Um, and as mentioned earlier in the show, obviously I watched Bram Stoker's Dracula by Francis Ford Coppola that stars Anthony Hopkins, Winona Ryder, Keanu Reeves, and Gary Oldman. And kind of a weirdly paced movie at points, but it's so fun and stylized that it's just, I don't know. It was great. I liked it a lot. It's much hornier and more romance oriented than Nosferatu was, but it's I don't know. It's cool that this like same basic narrative has been adapted in such distinct ways from each
Yeah,
other.
right.
Um,
Like there's so many different Dracula stories now that is
mhm.
you can kind of get whichever kind of experience you want. You want something super horny, you can go to Twilight or this. You want something super terrifying, you can go to Nosferatu.
Yeah. And then the last thing I've been doing is reading book 5 of the Stormlight Archive, Wind and Truth. I'm about 200 pages in, which, if you know Stormlight Archive, means I have over 1,000 pages to go. But it's good so far. I'm excited for how Brandon will wrap up this like cycle of the story. I'm excited to see how all things pan out because from what I understand, book 5 is the end of this, and then there's like a 15, 20-year time jump or something, and then there will be 5 more books that will carry on. But usually his time jumps between series are much bigger than this. So I'm intrigued, I'm excited, but I'm also worried that maybe he's starting to tie all of his things in too tightly so that they can
Mm-hmm.
enjoy it on their own. But so far I've liked all the stuff of his that I've read, so I'm gonna give him the benefit of the doubt for now
Right
and keep
on.
reading it. I just hope that this arc comes to a satisfying conclusion in its own right. But that's it. That's all I got for this time. Um,
Nice. Thank you all very much for listening. We hope you enjoyed us talking about Nosferatu and a whole lot of other fun things going on in the world and our lives.
yeah. But we'll be back in 2 weeks for another episode. We haven't decided what on yet. There are a couple interesting things floating out there. But yeah, we'll have an episode in 2 weeks for y'all, so stay tuned for that. Until then, stay safe, stay busy, go watch some movies, and do whatever. Niles, where can people find you online in the interim?
On Instagram at Niles Got No Styles. What about you, Dylan? Where can people follow you online?
On Instagram at DylanD1026, on Twitter at D-Day Movies, on YouTube at D-Day Movies, and yay, the video that I said last episode was bombing in between recording and releasing our podcast on it, it became the most successful thing I've ever made. So if you're here from that, thank you for watching that and the support on that video. Yay, that made me feel really good. I'm really
Yeah.
happy about that. But you can also find me on Twitch at some point, D-Day_movies. You can find both of us here at Play Pause Rewind, as well as our second YouTube channel, Play Pause Rewind Videos. We're on YouTube and all your podcast platforms of choice every 2 weeks to talk about movies and TV. Thank you all so much for watching and listening. If you like this, share with a friend, leave a 5-star review, do the whole, thing. But yeah, we'll see y'all next time. Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.